In the previous video, we identified three central themes of the esoteric religious triad: an order of emanation, and the flow sequence 1, 2, 3, which presents in religious themes of the East and West as descent, resurrection or restoration, and ascent. We looked at an example of the symbolism of number, which has more significance in religious literature than we ordinarily imagine. And finally, we learned to look at the religious triad as two binary opposites and their union in a third aspect. We found deified representations of this latter principle in agricultural themes, in the Christian trinity, and throughout the religious triads of antiquity. In religious esoteric literature, these principles are allegorically represented through the idea of God, Satan, and humanity, the highest ideal of good, the highest expression of evil, and the human being. We find them in the sun, moon, and earth god triads, and in the gender triad of Joseph, Mary, and the infant Jesus. We notice that the Christian rendering of the Holy Trinity obfuscates this underlying principle, either through ignorance or as part of an explicit wider strategy to assume religious or spiritual authority. We can be quite sure, however, that human beings have a primitive historical tendency of deifying and worshipping, or demonizing, unsettling phenomena of the natural world, as well as individuals with unsettling sight and ability, and nowhere is this more evident than in the religious world, particularly in the West, and especially in the pre-literate world of the masses. But the realization that all these deified representations refer to fundamental laws and principles was not entirely missed, and we find undeified descriptions of them in Gnostic literature, and with more elaboration in the ideology of George Gurdjieff and in the literature of Jewish mysticism. We will explore the last of these ideologies first, since it is probable that the knowledge of Jewish mysticism, or some similarly ancient teaching, informed Greek philosophy, Hermeticism, the Gnostics, and Gurdjieff. Jewish mysticism has taken different forms as it transited the ages, beginning with prophetic mysticism, which is almost 3,000 years old, to the various forms of Kabbalistic mysticism, which first appeared before the early Church and continues in one form or another until this day. Kabbalistic literature claims to represent a kind of Prisca Theologia in that it embodies the wider historical knowledge of Jewish mysticism. Many aspects of this knowledge are unknown to us since, traditionally in this sphere, knowledge is regarded as a material resource and is not given away for free to anyone who asks, particularly in rabbinic circles. But even so, we have the symbolic framework upon which the underlying principles of the religious esoteric triad were, in all likelihood, first placed: the tetragrammaton, which first appeared at the time of prophetic Jewish mysticism at around 800 BC. Superficially, the tetragrammaton refers to the four-part name of God, Yahweh. But since there are no vowels in Hebrew, it is written YHVH, or other vowelless iterations of Jehovah, and is written using these Hebrew letters. I prefer to pronounce these as Yod-He, Vowel-He, because, like others, I find it easier as an English speaker than the Hebrew pronunciation Yod-He, War-He. We cannot pinpoint with any certainty when the principle of opposites and their reconciliation was associated and applied to the four-part name of God, although I suspect it was closer to 800 BC rather than the 12th and 13th centuries AD, when the tetragrammaton and other Kabbalistic knowledge was first partially elaborated in the public forum. For the moment, we need only consider the first three letters of this name, which refer to the triad Godhead. The last letter refers to the material world, which we will discuss at the proper place. In Kabbalistic literature, the letters Yod, He and Vav refer to the active force, its opposite, the passive force, and the neutralizing or reconciling force. And alongside the Gnostics and Gurdjieffians, Kabbalists regard these three forces as primary and the source of the manifest world, and the principle on which all phenomena in the manifest world are arranged. We find references to these principles or forces throughout Gnostic literature. In the three stellas of Seth, the paraphrase of Shem, the trimorphic Protonoia, the tripartite tractate, and the book of Zostrianos. The paraphrase of Shem is a perfect allegorical representation of the underlying principle of the triad. I heard a voice saying to me, Shem, since you are from unmixed power, and you are the first being upon the earth, hear and understand what I shall say to you first concerning the great powers who were in existence in the beginning before I appeared. There was light and darkness, and there was the Spirit between them. The Gnostic book Zostrianos speaks specifically about the three fundamental forces, from the three powers of the invisible spirit and the origin of the Barbelloeon. The Saviour answered, saying, Zostrianos, hear about all these things. Now the pre-existent principles are three in number, although they have appeared from a single origin of the Barbelloeon, not as an indefinite number of principles and powers, nor as derivatives of any origin and any power. Rather, they have manifested every principle and empowered every power. George Gurdjieff's elaboration of the three forces is in lockstep with the ideas of Jewish mysticism, but as a contemporary philosopher, his lengthy elaborations of how these principles manifest in ourselves and the world around us distinguishes him from other religious esoteric sources. He wrote, the fundamental law of the universe is the law of three forces, or three principles, or, as it is often called, the law of three. According to this law, every action, all phenomena in all worlds without exception, is the result of the simultaneous action of three forces, the positive, the negative, and the neutralizing. In the Kabbalah, we find the three preeminent principles represented in the Ein Sof, and the Ein Sof Or, which is sometimes shown above the tree of life, while a tree itself illustrates a procession of triads with upward and downward trajectories, and serves, amongst other things, to map the progressive unfolding of triadic divisions inherent in the design of the material world and humanity. It is a complex design template, although by no means unique, since, as we will discover later, we find the very same template consistently perpetuated in one or another symbolic rendering throughout the literature of orthodox and heterodox religious esoteric teachings in the East and West. In any case, we find the symbolic representation of the tetragrammaton in medieval and especially Hermetic art, in different forms of alchemic literature, in various occult literature past and present, and meaning-making systems like the tarot cards, and many other places. As we begin to explore the design principles which are claimed to be universal, the ideology of the tetragrammaton is, in my estimation, the most valuable resource of all. It explains so much that cannot possibly be understood or contextualized otherwise. The overlap between Gurdjieffian and Kabbalistic ideology is evident in the three divisions, schools, or approaches to the Kabbalah: the practical approach, the meditative, ecstatic or emotional approach, and the theoretical approach. Likewise, Gurdjieff points out 3 historical religious ways which aim toward self-awareness. The way of the faker, which works on the practical mastery of the body through arresting movement. The way of the monk, which is essentially an emotional approach. And the way of the yogi, which is, or was, essentially a method of working on the mind. He states that people are born in one of 3 corresponding types. Those who are based in their intellectual body, those who are based in their emotional body, and those who are based in their physical body. The same corresponding divisions can be found in ancient forms of numerology, in the 3 tiers of the Kabbalistic tree of life, in the 3 gunas of the Indian Vedanta, and elsewhere. Altogether, these triads offer up the 3 characteristic fundamental divisions of the human being, physical, intellectual, and emotional, as just one tangible example of how the law of 3 might appear to us in the ordinary world. But representations of the law of 3, from the vantage points accessible to us, are more pervasive and difficult to observe than this example. So I would like to offer an overview of Gurdjieff's thoughts on the law of 3 forces, as quoted by Russian philosopher P.D. Uspensky. We must examine the fundamental law that creates all phenomena and all the diversity or unity of all the universes. This is the law of 3, or the law of 3 principles, or the law of 3 forces. It consists of the fact that every phenomenon, on whatever scale, and in whatever world it may take place, from molecular to cosmic phenomena, is the result of the combination or the meeting of 3 different and opposing forces. Contemporary thought realizes the existence of 2 forces for the production of phenomena, force and resistance, positive and negative, male and female cells, and so on. No question has ever been raised as to the 3rd, or if it has been raised, it has scarcely been heard. According to real, exact knowledge, 1 force or 2 forces can never produce a phenomenon. The presence of a 3rd force is necessary, for it is only with the help of a 3rd force that the first 2 can produce what may be called phenomenon, no matter in what sphere. The teaching of the 3 forces is at the root of all ancient systems. The first force may be called active or positive, the second passive or negative, the third neutralizing, but these are merely names. For in reality, all 3 forces are equally active and appear as active, passive and neutralizing only at their meeting points. That is to say, only in relation to one another at a given moment. P.D. Uspensky, In Search of the Miraculous. So far in this series, we have engaged with the claim that God made humanity and the world in his own likeness. We have established up to the point of the dyad, or division of 2, that all 3 worlds are in fact alike. In order to establish whether they are similarly alike from the triadic point of view, we first looked at religious triads to establish the inner meaning, which is not immediately obvious in the rendering of the Christian Trinity, but is easily recognized and quite well established elsewhere in Orthodox and diverse heterodox literature. Now we are in a position to characteristically compare these religious triadic divisions with any inherent and like divisions that might exist in the material world and the individual. Thanks for listening.